and welcome to the Weekly Rushes, your rushed rush, your caffeinated rush, and I have my caffeine ready, your caffeinated rush through all the weekly movie and streaming news that we've managed to curate and pull from the ether online, and what's going on in Hollywood and what's happening with indie films and all that kind of stuff, but also what's happening off camera too. What are the Hollywood dramas out there? We were hitting the Oscars on Sunday night, Monday morning. We've got Oscar fever. Oh, it's weird to think that we could have been there, yeah, but we're not, and so we have to just crack on. Anyway, Will Smith has made his first appearance at an awards show. He was winning an award at the African American Film Critics Association Awards, the AAFCAA. He was there accepting an award for his acting on the movie Emancipation. And I think this is an Apple TV film. And obviously this was either in production or completing production shortly after the infamous slap from last year's Oscars. And I think this would have, if he hadn't slapped Chris Rock, would have seen him probably land a second Best Actor nomination, obviously having won it for King Richard. He didn't mention anything about the slap. He kept his remarks lighthearted and sort of fizzy, and you could see this as quite a sort of low-key step back out in into the public arena. I just wanted to ask you guys, what's your take on Will Smith? Have you forgiven him? Have we forgiven him? Should we have ever forgiven him? Was he quite right to defend Jada Pinkett Smith? Well, the second story of the day is all about Chris Rock, and of course his recent live, obviously it's not live now, but his live show on Netflix, Outrage, I think it's called. He kind of for the first time talked about the infamous slap, and he not only talked about the infamous slap, but he also talked about Jada Pinkett Smith. So Will Smith has stepped out and said nothing, but Chris Rock has stepped out and said something. He obviously has talked about the fact that almost a year after the scandal, etc., he said this: everybody knows, yes, it happened. He apparently sounds quite sort of fed up that he has to sort of even tackle this topic. I can well imagine that the amount of times Chris Rock has been asked about this, or perhaps had it requested that he put part of it into his stand-up. I mean, I'd be curious to know whether Netflix offered him more money for him to talk about this, because obviously everyone's going to rush there and watch it, aren't they? He said, everyone knows it. Yes, I got slapped a year ago. I got smacked by this motherfucker. And people are like, did it hurt? It still hurts, he says. It hurts so much. I've got summertime ringing in my ears. Obviously, you know, the classic Will Smith song. He also talked about or criticised or sort of threw shade on those who seek attention by playing the victim. He says, I am not a victim. You will never see me on Oprah crying. He then actually talks about Jada Pinkett Smith. And this is, you know, if you feel what he said was harsh at the Oscars, see what you think of this. His wife was fucking his son's friend, okay? I normally wouldn't talk about this shit, but for some reason, the Smiths, put that shit on the internet. I think this was around the time me and Nadia were talking about the entanglement. Apparently Jada Pinkett Smith had an entanglement. I didn't realise it was with a friend of her son's. This is the stinger. She hurt him way more than he hurt me. And when asked why he didn't fight back or anything like that, I mean, you know, this was on the stage of the Oscars. I mean, being attacked is quite something, regardless of what you said on television, at the Oscars, handing out an Oscar, etc. He said that, Chris Rock said that, you know, his parents taught him to never fight in front of white people. So, wow. I mean, I'd be curious to know if Will Smith saw the routine, has heard these words, or whether he's kind of put himself in a sort of mollycoddled bunker where he doesn't have to sort of hear this and hopes he can just sort of ride it out for a few more years or a few more months. But again, maybe you feel that Chris Rock is the nasty one and Will Smith is the put upon one. Is what he says right about Jada Pinkett Smith? They did sort of publicise the most traumatic thing that a wife could potentially do to a husband. Doesn't particularly put Jada in a particularly nice place either, does it? So tell us your thoughts, guys. And as we approach the Oscars, it's all kind of Oscar related, and you do kind of wonder whether Chris Rock's kind of reveal in his stand-up landing the weekend or the week before the Oscars, you know, there's a kind of anniversary aspect to all of that, isn't there? Well, another drama, or a potential drama, that's sort of erupted only sort of hours almost before the Oscar ceremony is Michelle Yeoh. Is she going to be disqualified? Michelle Yeoh obviously is the star of Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is a film that I think is going to do much better in the Oscars than it did, say, in the BAFTAs. Michelle Yeoh reposted, and this is the danger of reposting articles, isn't it? Reposted an article from Vogue, on her Twitter, in the Vogue article, it basically suggests that Cate Blanchett has won enough awards Does she need to win another? She posted a bunch of screen grabs, and the article, as I say, suggested that two-time Oscar winner who's nominated for a work in Tar. I am absolutely on my own with thinking it was a beyond pretentious performance and film. But she's going to win. She's going to win the Oscar for sure. But this article says she doesn't exactly need another Oscar. Whereas for Michelle Yeoh, she said, this is not just for me, but this is for every little girl that looks like me. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. But this throws up a huge problem for the Oscars. And we've already had the problem with Andrea Riseborough and For Leslie, I think it's For Leslie or To Leslie, in which, there was the debate as to whether, they'd broken sort of Academy rules in the promotion of the film and the sort of luring, if you like, of Academy voters. But this presents a problem, Michelle Yeoh reposting this, precisely because the Oscar campaign or the Oscar rules specifically forbid, quote, attempting to cast a negative or derogatory light by anyone else associated with an eligible film. In particular, any tactic that singles out the competition, i.e. another nominee, by name or title, is expressly forbidden. So she wouldn't be entitled to run for the Best Actress Oscar, which if anyone stands a chance of beating Cate Blanchett, it's Michelle Yeoh here. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that anyone would win an Oscar simply based on the Academy wanting to be seen to be more diverse than they were. But I think Michelle Yeoh is in a much stronger place at the Oscars than she is in any other award ceremony to potentially beat Cate Blanchett. Now, importantly, Michelle Yeoh then pulled the repost of this article down quite swiftly. I think she took it down within hours or within minutes even. But the damage potentially has been done. So right up to the wire, we've got all sorts of kind of dramas happening. Could Michelle Yeoh be disqualified from winning an Oscar? Nicolas Cage was at another award ceremony. He was at the Variety Legend and Groundbreaker Award ceremony at Miami Film Festival. And he was talking about why he's not dabbled in the world of superheroes, why he's not entered the MCU. And he sort of admitted that he has to be nice about Marvel films because they're such a big part of the movie-making industry, aren't they? And he said, as he said, I have to pay credit to Stan Lee because apparently Nick Cage took half his name, Cage, from the Stan Lee character called Luke Cage. When I go into those secondhand comic shops, you see lots of Luke Cage comics, and I've never been drawn to him. So he describes Stan Lee as his surrealistic father. He says, I don't need to be in the MCU or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm Nick Cage. And I kind of agree with him. He nearly appeared in a superhero film, a sort of Tim Burton iteration of Superman. It didn't happen. But he also talks about the fact that science fiction is his favourite genre, and it's a genre that means you can almost say anything. He said too many people are too afraid to say things in this cancel culture. And as he said, I like this line, he said you can say anything if it's in sci-fi because the rules and regs of the universe don't apply in the same way that they do on Earth. And as he says, I mean, imagine if you're on a planet called Exeter. Curious name, Exeter, and that's where something happened that wouldn't be permissible on Earth. You'd be like, didn't mean that, it was set in Exeter. We've talked a lot about Disney, Marvel films, they're releasing too many. Ant-Man and the Quantumania, regardless of if you liked it, it's been disastrous in many regards. I mean, interesting that a disastrous result for Disney and Marvel is still a film that makes $500 million. But comparatively, in terms of its Rotten Tomatoes appreciation, its audience appreciation, it's one of the lowest. And lower rated scores are coming through increasingly for Marvel films. It also had the largest and steepest drop-off. I don't know if you remember the last weekly rushes we were saying, always look at the second weekend at the box office for the really truthful news on whether a film is liked or going to do well. It had a 69% tail off on the second week. So Bob Iger, who's head of Disney, has kind of, has come as close as he could to being critical of Kevin Feige, who's head of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He said, we need newness. He says, sequels work for Disney, but does Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of the same character necessarily work? Could that be a direct swipe at Ant-Man? Could we see the end of certain sort of characters having their own films carrying them? I mean, obviously Iron Man had 3, Guardians of the Galaxy is about to have 3, Thor's had 3, but maybe he's right. Maybe they need to sort of just pause at that point, not lose the characters, have them thread into others, but have newness at its heart. I think Kang the Conqueror, Jonathan Majors, is a good example of newness, but given Ant-Man's underwhelming performance, given it's the sort of kick-off for Phase 5, there are worries, there are cracks, there are things going wrong at Disney, and I think Bob Iger sort of saying this is kind of an acknowledgement to the world that he thinks things are going a bit the way of Star Wars, insofar as they've oversaturated the market with Marvel content. Even I'm getting sick and tired of it, and I'm looking to DC to save it. Just got to have a little bit of coffee. Wow, that's a strong one, and I'm also going to open one of these. Who remembers that character in Police Academy? There's the tongue like that. He's had long hair, weirdo. Seth Rogen, what do I feel about Seth Rogen? I like him in small doses, He hasn't ever sort of set my light on fire. He hasn't sort of fired off my rockets. He hasn't sort of blown off the doors or whatever. I thought he was quite good in The Disaster Artist. He was, I think, his best performance. I really liked him in The Fabelmans. The recent The Fabelmans, he was good. He played Spielberg's mother's love interest. But he's been on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was talking about critics. And this is something that I think is really important. I just wanted to mention this because although we have very strong responses sometimes to films, Tar, for example. The reason I went in hard on something like Tar is that there are so many, if not the vast majority of people defending it. It doesn't need to worry about some squirt saying, oh, I didn't like it, da 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 da. So I feel safe to kind of talk about it in such a sort of stern way, because I think sometimes films that everyone charges towards deserve a little bit of prodding and poking and all that. They're robust enough to take it. But also there are many films that just get hammered. And when that happens, you know, people do forget that they're both the cast is there and they're humans and they see this stuff. And of course, there's the crews that work on them, spend, you know, months, years crafting them down to only have them dismissed by one line from a critic. So Seth Rogen, I think, raises some interesting points. He said on the Diary of a CEO podcast, I think if most critics knew how much it hurt people, what they were writing, they would second guess the way they perhaps write things. And I do think sometimes, you know, some reviews converge on almost trolling. I think it's important to often qualify what you're saying or to perhaps see how someone else would find something in it. For example, I acknowledge wholeheartedly that I am almost a solitary voice in a sea of positivity for a film like Tar. He says, Seth Rogen, it's devastating. He knows people who haven't recovered. People carry these criticisms through their entire lives and careers. Now, in the world of streaming, obviously part of the, you know, the creative team behind the mega hit Euphoria, starring Zendaya, have been working alongside the musician, producer, etc. The Weeknd, obviously spelt Weeknd, because someone else had the name, The Weeknd, so it's still called The Weeknd. They've been producing and making a series for HBO Max, and it's called The Idol. But apparently an article in I think Variety magazine, or was it? No, Rolling Stone magazine, said that this is a production that's going disgustingly off the rails. I mean, choice language there. The accusation is that it features so many sex scenes of such a dubious nature that huge numbers of those performing or acting on the show are being put into increasingly difficult, challenging, uncomfortable situations. Sources close to the project, as I say, describe it as going disgustingly off the rails, saying that there are really troubling storylines. Apparently it focuses on torture porn and stuff like that. And it's about, I believe it's about a young woman or someone trying to break into or make a career or succeed in the pop industry. I mean, we've responded to the teasers and trailers. 13 unnamed sources describe it, the atmosphere on the set being chaotic, and that sex scenes were increasingly making people feel uncomfortable. One source simply described the production as a shit show. And so, of course, The Weeknd, HBO Max, Sam Levinson, the creator, have had to push back against this and say, look, this isn't the case. Yeah, I think they lost a director at some point earlier in the production. So, you know, when you hear these stories of troubled productions, invariably, in my experience, I think it's always true. I don't ever think there's kind of, you know, there's never smoke without fire. So I do think there must be trouble at Mill. And so it'll be interesting to see how this sort of comes out in the wash, because it looked like an incredibly stylized teaser trailer. I was quite excited about this. We're all looking forward to seeing it. But could that trouble translate onto screen? I want to ask your opinion on this actor. Are you a fan? Girls are a huge fan of Aaron Taylor Johnson, obviously the actor. He was recently in Bullet Train. He played John Lennon, I believe. He's married to the director and artist Sam Taylor Johnson too. He's been cast, or is about to be seen, in Robert Eggers. We've talked about this too, the director of The Lighthouse, The Witch, The Northman. He's making a new film called Nosferatu. And he's bringing Aaron Taylor Johnson on board. The cast at the moment also stars Lily Rose Depp, who we were just talking about in The Idol, Bill Skarsgård, Nicholas Hoult, Willem Dafoe, and Emma Corrin. In this new version of Nosferatu, it's a gothic tale of obsession where a haunted young woman played by Lily Rose Depp is in a 19th century Germany, and the ancient Transylvanian vampire played by Skarsgård, brilliant bit of casting, that stalks her, bringing untold horror. I thought in Bullet Train he was like a young Eric Idle. I thought he was old. He doesn't rock it for me, Aaron Taylor Johnson. I'm sure he's kind of nice looking. He's got that sort of, I don't know, Chalamet sort of long locks and all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't a fan of Bullet Train. I'm not actually a fan of Aaron Taylor Johnson. As soon as I hear he's in something, I go, so what? Now, this is exciting. Wednesday, as we know, was a massive hit for Netflix. I think it was the second most successful, or the second most watched series on Netflix yet, which is saying something when you've got things like Stranger Things and Dharma and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, a couple of the episodes were directed by Tim Burton, but that clever creative partnership between Jenny Ortega, cracking young actress. I mean, I've only seen 2 or 3 episodes of Wednesday, and her icy sort of veneer was brilliant. It's very hard to make that sort of icy veneer last across episodes, but I found her compelling, and she was great also in Scream, the last Scream 5, was it? I thought she was great in that, and she was also great in a horror film by Ty West called X, where she played a sound recordist, quite a puritanical one, and then suddenly gets involved in making a porn film. She's good. She's a cracking young actress. Well, anyway, no surprise. Beetlejuice 2 could be coming, guys, or they're talking about it at Warner Brothers. Tim Burton signed up to direct. Jenny Ortega in there, probably to play the main role, not the Winona Ryder character, but perhaps maybe Winona Ryder's daughter, perhaps. Beetlejuice is an absolute mainstay of the 1980s. For me, it was one of those films that lacked format, sort of sprung out left field, shocked you. Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, absolutely sensational. There's talk that obviously Michael Keaton will be reprising his role as the odd creature that appears when you say his name 3 times. Brilliant sort of conflation and convergence of surrealism, horror, comedy, musical even, and, you know, just played to all of Tim Burton's strengths. I think it's quite exciting, a Beetlejuice 2. I mean, I know we all like to think, oh, should there be sequels, should they revisit? But sometimes, I think, and with all the new technology now, I hope it's not CGI. One of the things I liked about Beetlejuice was you had real people. Do you remember that character who he'd been involved in a car crash, and he had a tyre track through his head and he was flattened? Costumes, go for costumes rather, although there was some pretty bad CGI in it. This is the year for Jonathan Majors, isn't it? The guy who plays Kang the Conqueror. The best thing in Ant-Man and the Quantum Mania was Jonathan Majors as Kang. We first came across him in the film The Last Black Man in San Francisco. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. Wonderful indie movie. He's an incredibly sweet character, almost like an Of Mice and Men sort of character. He was obviously very successful in the limited series Lovecraft Country. I watched a couple of them, it didn't really float my boat. He's looking to star in a new film called The Understudy, D-A Understudy, The Understudy. And it looks like Spike Lee, that fabulous director, is circling to direct. I like the blurb on this. I like the synopsis or the logline. The Understudy tells the story of life imitating art when the understudy of a Broadway production finds a role he's willing to kill for. Brilliant, theatrical, psychopathy, nut job, ambition, all that kind of stuff. A review of Pearl is going up, which is really a horror film about ambition and a desire to be famous and a star. So I think this will be really good. The Understudy is a new project coming, potentially with Spike Lee directing and Jonathan Majors in there too. Okay, here's a number of actors. I want to know what you think of them now. There was a time where they were the absolute draw, the absolute kind of, I've got to go and see that film because she's in it or he's in it. Scarlett Johansson, where is she at now? Is she somewhat tarnished, diminished? Has Black Widow and Marvel slightly typecast her? Is her range as rangeful as we like to think? I thought she was great in Under the Skin, but that was very much an exception to the rule when it comes to the kind of film she's in. Penelope Cruz, absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning and brilliant in, well, she was the weakest thing in the recent comedy film Official Competition. She's brilliant, she looks great, but is she still Class A star? And Owen Wilson, who we've always had a soft spot for, but weirdly for Owen Wilson, as soon as he sort of steps into the central performance of something, he's not necessarily as good as he is when he plays a small part. And as someone once said, I think Laurence Olivier years ago, playing a small part often takes more skill than playing a main part. So there's in no way a criticism. But those 3 actors, Scarlett Johansson, Penelope Cruz and Owen Wilson, are to star in a new rom-com. It's currently known as Paris Paramount, that's its working title. And I quite like, again, the logline for this, and it's going to follow a talented young writer-director who falls in love with a producer, so 2 creatives in the film industry, with the pair ending up making successful films before calling it a day on their romantic relationship and their professional relationship. And then a new project comes along and they're thrown into each other's company again. So that's a new project called, working title, Paris Paramount Rom-Com, Scarlett Johansson, Penelope Cruz and Owen Wilson. And I believe Jennifer Lawrence is also in there as the lead actress. Here's another group of actors who I think we've all got a lot of time for. You know, you feel the younger generations coming through now, the sort of Paul Mescals and the Daisy Edgar Jones, obviously his colleague, co-star on Normal People. Daisy Edgar Jones, Jacob Elordi from Euphoria, Will Poulter, who we know brilliantly from so many films, and also soon to be seen in Guardians of the Galaxy. Diego Calva, who was brilliant actually. It was the best thing, I think, in Babylon, that kind of mad sex romp in hedonistic Hollywood. They're all starring together in a film called On Swift Horses. It's based on a novel by Shannon Pufar, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and it's about newlyweds Muriel and Lee, who are beginning a bright new life when he returns from the Korean War. Their newfound stability is upended by the arrival of Lee's charismatic younger brother, a wayward gambler with a secret, and a dangerous love triangle develops. But I think it'd be good to see Daisy Edgar Jones. I think Daisy Edgar Jones needs to put a little bit of blue water between whatever she does next and that film where the crawdads sing. I know some people liked it. Oh my God, I thought it was one of the worst films of last year. Having said don't be critical, there's, again, so many people liking that film, but I just thought it was beyond cliched. So it'd be really good, I think, for her to kind of move away from that and into something new. And here's an actress that we haven't heard much about, really, dramatically or positively, since Star Wars. Daisy Ridley is to star in The Better Liar, which is a drama series. So this is a streaming series based on a book of the same name by Tannen Jones. I believe she's producing it. She's stepping behind the camera a bit more, Daisy Ridley, and I think that's quite a smart move, because one of the dangers of when you are one of the key characters in a Star Wars film is that you become forever remembered just as Rey. Obviously she was Rey in the most recent trilogy. But this, again, there's a good concept behind this. I like this. The Better Liar is, in The Better Liar, a woman hires a lookalike in an effort to conceal her sister's death and claim their shared inheritance. Her deception exposes a web of dangerous secrets. I think this is going to be interesting. I think, again, she needs something. She's done a few sort of misfires. There was that, I can't remember what that sort of sci-fi-ish apocalyptic drama she did with Tom Holland was. That didn't do particularly well either. She's also been filming another noir-like thriller called Magpie. And that was based on another story that she developed herself. So I think if she steps towards production, a little bit like Brad Pitt's doing at the moment with his Plan 5 company, that's not a bad thing. This story in the world of streaming, this is a BBC story. This is the Jimmy Savile drama called The Reckoning, in which Steve Coogan is playing the massively disgraced TV presenter who, post his death was discovered to have in terms of those we know abused at least 72 people whilst he was working for the BBC and in connection with the BBC. And those are the people that he abused in connection with the BBC. And as everyone knows, his paedophilic actions probably reached way, way, way beyond that. What's weird always about the Jimmy Savile story is that so many people in the industry would talk about what a weirdo he was for so many years. And everyone now pretends that no one talked like that or knew that. Everyone did. Take it from me. Everyone did. And no one did anything. Interestingly, there's been a lot of debate. Some of the papers, The Sun, I think, and the Daily Mail have been suggesting that actually the BBC have pulled the plug on this, or they're shelving it because it's too much of a hot potato. It's too complex, it's too tricky, it's too potentially traumatizing, I think, to broadcast. Now, in behind-the-scene photos and images of Steve Coogan, he looks remarkably like Jimmy Savile, unsettlingly so, to the point that I could well imagine that this would be quite traumatic for both his victims, but also any victims of abuse who will understand and acknowledge and, in a sense, traumatically relate to what he did. But interestingly, what they've done on the BBC production, the BBC have pushed back about this, saying absolutely they are not pulling this. They're still scheduling and running towards, I think, a summer 2023 release on this 4-part BBC drama. But what I think the BBC have done, and I wonder what you think about this, they've actually brought into production and onto set some of his Jimmy Savile's actual victims in an attempt, I think it's like a strategy, to win the trust of survivors of his paedophilia and his abuse, wanting to show to them, if you like, and thereby the rest of the world, in a sense, that they're dealing with this in a sort of sensitive and considered and careful fashion. I mean, if you want to be cynical, you could see this as another means for the BBC to tell itself off, self-flagellate, and show that it has the capacity to be self-critical and acknowledge the errors of its ways. But interestingly, there was an interview with one of the women who was abused by Jimmy Savile, who was on set when she first saw Steve Coogan walking towards her. And she said this: as he was walking towards me, in my head I was thinking, no, go away. I kept thinking, go away. Seemingly this wasn't kept in my head. I was saying it out loud and didn't realise I was bloody saying it. I was so embarrassed. She doesn't need to be embarrassed. It does strike me as odd that this would have been done in this way. Steve Coogan walking towards her. That doesn't feel particularly like a duty of care, but perhaps she asked for it like that. Perhaps she said she wanted that. Almost a sort of facing the source of your demons, but doing it as safely as you could because you know it's not actually demons. Must have been a very, very surreal moment. Do you think a Jimmy Savile drama should be made? are the BBC right? Is there a way in which by doing this drama or making this drama, they can help people heal, and they can also take more responsibility for their negligence, if you like, in allowing Jimmy Savile to, be such a predator? And finally, that brings us to films of the week. And there are two kind of big films being released this week that, and they're two they're very mainstream films. One is Scream 6. I kid you not, Scream 6. But I'm hearing from some of the early reviews coming in on this that this is a sort of pleasant surprise. I thought Scream 5 was really average. It was all right. And that was apparently the relaunch. So this is the second film in a sort of relaunch of the Scream franchise. Obviously started with the Wes Craven classic film with the early death of Drew Barrymore. So the Scream films are notorious for their opening scenes being surprises or shocks or twisting narrative expectations. 4 survivors of Ghostface leave Woodsboro and they head off to New York to start a new life. And before you know it, we're back in the territory of Ghostface, stalking them, hunting them, terrorizing them on phones and mobiles, and trying to find them. I wonder whether what they need to do with Ghostface now, maybe they do this in this film, is move his kind of activities over to social media a little bit. Maybe he needs to become a sort of traumatic troll, a traumatizing troll who kind of contacts them by Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snap, and all that kind of thing. Snap would be a good one, wouldn't it? I hear this is sort of slightly better than most people expected it to be. It's an 18 certificate, so it's going to be quite gory. So yeah, if you fancy some scares, some jump scares, it's a slasher movie, always has been. But as someone quite interestingly pointed out when I was very damning of the trailer, this is a kind of different twist on a whodunit. That's what's at the heart of the Scream films, is whodunit, who's behind the mask. And if you approach it like that, then perhaps it's a really good way to do a whodunit. And the other film released this week is a really curious one, and I think this is only coming out. I think this must have been shot a long time ago. I think it was in fact shot before the pandemic. This is 65. And this is a film, curiously, that stars Adam Driver. And the log line on this is that after a catastrophic crash on an unknown planet, Adam Driver's character is stranded on a planet that's on Earth, but a different iteration of Earth, 65 million years ago, where he's basically got to fight all sorts of prehistoric creatures, battle his way through jungles. And in fact, in the trailer, we haven't reacted to the trailer, but he runs around with giant guns. This is quite a non-Adam Driver kind of project. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about this. It could be fun for a bit of weirdness, but that's 65, which is another sort of sci-fi action pick. And there you have your weekly rushes, your rush through all the weekly movie news and a little bit of streaming news this week. Tell us what stories floated your boat, tell us what you think about them, and we hope you have a fabulous Oscar watching weekend.